I am filling in for a person who would have done this job much better than I do, but on the other hand, probably that's what I do best, to fill in for other people. So there I am, I'm filling in for Isabelle Dutriche, who couldn't come, and also I'm filling in for Jerry Fodor, who is among us, but is not among us. So let me just start by taking you, I want to get sort of a general picture of what is happening and some sort of way to understand the importance of the talks that we have heard today. And we know, we have been knowing for a long time that association is an extremely powerful way to just gather information and taking decision, as even these pictures had already shown to you way before we started all the associative movements. But now that we have really very important and powerful association machine, the question exists, okay, what do they do? Do they actually understand the internal composition of something? And this is, I want to stay in our moment of still vacation out of Christmas, so that's why I have reporting here the conversation that I had with ChatGPT on Santa, and so he said, okay, what can you draw a Santa with 11 arms? And that is the first attempt. I picked 11 precisely because it's a lower frequency number. And then how about another attempt? Okay, well, doesn't work. This is an attempt at creating Santa Claus with exactly 11 arms again, right? And there again, another one, where it even says, okay, the gifts will distinguish them. So it cannot do it. And not only that, but it's not a question of numbers. You can ask a 5 or a 3 arms Santa Claus. That cannot be done. Because we are in an infant-oriented symposium and conferences, let me just ask what a child, a 3-year-old child, would do to draw a 5 arms Santa Claus. And the important thing here is that that no 3-year-old would ever just draw like that. It's just not possible. And how about a 1-year-old? Well, there is the 1-year-old drawing, okay? And how about the 3-month-old? And that is the 3-month-old drawing, right? Well, we can extend this to like some sort of comparative psychology and ask, how would you draw a 3-armed Santa Claus? Okay, so what is the point that I'm trying to make here? The point I'm trying to make is that there are a lot of questions that have been asked originally in the philosophical literature, and that's been, in my opinion, very poorly represented in the psychological literature, and we cannot avoid them, even if we look at a very simple fact of an experience. And this is something that comes from lots of people in vision who have said, we don't just see things, we just see structured objects which are organized in a particular way. We cannot give up without studying structure, right? And so now we are here. We are here because we know that these questions become very important, and particularly important for those who work on infants who cannot use language in most of the cases to ask things about composition, to ask things about what kind of primitives there are. And see, here are some of the questions that I think were underlined, and Barbara did it very well. The list is very similar to the one that you presented. So what is the logical scaffolding of a representation, a non-verbal representation? How can we build it? By which basic elements? How we compose them? What can we do with this logical representation? So under what conditions we can take them and make inferences, putting them together? How do we do it? What are the processes that the brain, mind carries through when they do these kind of operations? And what makes us logical, which is something that we have heard from Nico, particularly, sorry about this thing, where the abilities come from, what's the role of language into them? Okay, I want to just say to you that there is a way in which this question has been ignored, and I would invite you to consider it not as a good way to do it. And the way in which you can see recently a paper that it seems to me just underestimates the importance of this question is a review paper by Fedorenko, Piantadosi, and Gibson, where the question is a question between the relation between thoughts and language. And it's a question that to which they give an answer that I think we and everybody in the speaker would agree with, which is thought is not based on language. Okay? So language is not necessary for any tested form of thought and vice versa. Okay? Now, well, why so? And that's the argument that I think is misleading. It's an argument, one of the arguments, which comes from brain imaging literature in adults. And the idea is the following. There are three very important networks. One is the language networks. The other one is what they call the reasoning networks. And the reasoning networks are two networks. One is the theory of mind network, which many people here contributed to essentially show the existence of. And the other one is this multiple demand network. And what is a multiple? And the argument is these three do not overlap. Therefore, thought is not based on language. Thought is not based on language. Well, the multiple demand network is defined and is very importantly used in the literature in sort of this kind of way. It comprises of regions that are co-activated when performing a diverse range of cognitively demanding tasks, including selective attention, working memory, and so on and so on and so on, and many, many more. So it's an extremely general description of what reasoning looks like, which comprises a lot of things that we have no clue about. And I don't think that this is much of a progress with respect to the idea that Aristotle pushed, that the brain's main role is just to cool the blood, right? So the point here is, this is to me the wrong way to address issues about the relation between language and thought and the nature of thought. We really need to go way more in the details, as the three talks that were presented today do. We need to ask questions which are extremely detailed, like, for example, okay, what is the primitive? Do we have something like a disjunction? Do infants have something like a disjunction? Can they compose function? This kind of questions are the one that will allow not only the infant literature, but really the literature about thought in general to make progress. Okay, I just want to say incidentally that if you really look at this in detail, you don't find what is kind of general broad picture of the relation between language and thought gives you. So this is Niccolò's original work in the dissertation that has been worked through by Anna Martina and other people who are here. And the idea here is, as you probably all know, that you can actually have the very same physical structure that can be either ambiguous or non-ambiguous. And then there is a disambiguating evidence, which comes out here. And this could allow you to make an inference. Now, if we look at, and this takes like an extremely short amount of time. And if we look at what happens in this amount of time in the brain, we find a very complex picture that shows that the brain is computing several kinds of representation and doing several operations that we need to disentangle. So, for example, at the very beginning of this moment, what we call the logical representation, there is only one area that is mostly responsible to just figure out whether something is unknown in the brain or not. And when there is disambiguating evidence, we find a completely different pattern that is showing activity. This is in a moment which takes not more than 3 seconds. And that is what we need to figure out. In the brain of the adult as well as in development, how come we are able to create this representation and make this kind of inferences so quickly? The same pattern we find, by the way, if you look in adults and infants with oculomotor data. There is both. Okay. So we are with questions. We cannot ignore them. And I really welcome this kind of symposium because we found that everybody tried to address this question in different ways by showing some sort of different strategies, but the common goal was very clear. The Pompeu-Hochman paper is right on target about the issue about what is the nature of the underlying mental representation that you create when you look at an event. But as Jeremy suggested, that's only the beginning. There is a lot of things that, and this is what worries me at this point of the literature, there are lots of ways in which you can ask questions about what are these mental representations, where do they come from? So, for example, how do we go about in terms of finding structure of the language of thought? Where is the source of evidence? One way to do it would be to take all the lexical semantic works, distillate from studies on language, what are the basic properties, for example, that verbs express and carry and transfer them into babies. There is a long research project of which what Jean-Remy presented is only a very, very tiny beginning, although very important, right? Other question, by which means do we build this kind of operations? Well, Nico's work was right on target to that. Probably we could have some model operators that are early available. It would be difficult not to have them, and they might not depend necessarily on language. But this work with 3-year-olds only tells us there is something to be studied in the nonverbal infants, and we try to do it in a poster that you can see here by simplifying as much as possible a design that you are all familiar, the tube design. This actually is a work that comes back again from Ernest's dissertation a long time ago, in which we invite infants to look at a situation with a reward in the short, in several times, of a very simple tube, and then we send the reward on the long. And the question for us is, if infants have two possibilities and they can represent, can they quickly switch from the one to the other? And the answer is very complicated. We look for anticipation, and the answer is, for the moment, no. Both 12-month-old and 15, 17-month-old infants don't seem to they anticipate when you repeat something, but they do not anticipate with a novel structure or in a novel situation. However, if we look at the displacement of a point on, I mean, the median position of the eyes, it seems that when they don't find the ball coming out on one other side, they do tend to go into the other arm of this kind of very, very simple device. So that suggests that maybe they have in mind the possibility to reorient completely what we do immediately, but the unfortunate way in which we have to work is parameterization, 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 and we are working on that. Last thing is the Pomechowska and colleagues' work. That has been very, very important to me for this kind of work, and it's again right on target on the question about the basic representation that carry compositionality. But as Barbara herself said, again, here is a research program. It's not something that we can consider finished in a work that is taking less than 10, 15 years. Because to what extent this is a truly compositional system is still an open question. We need to figure out what kind of functions are being able to be composed, what is the relation between these and the very first relational expression that, for example, a language can carry. All these questions are still very open. I want to finish to say that these are strategies that I admire very much. They open novel avenues. We are trying to use a different strategy, which is essentially obsession or senility, if somebody wants to look at it another way, which has been, in these years, to just focus on very few cases of some potential logical primitives and try to narrow down as much as possible their interpretation, their logical, their temporal course, everything that we can say of a very simple kind of case for which we started working, particularly with this famous, by now, work of Nico. So can we say, for example, that unknown or known is different from A or B versus A? We can do it if we take a representation, for example, that instead of having this simple thing get complexified, right? And then we ask questions like, for example, okay, can we actually make the same inference when there are lots of this kind of situation? And the answer is, this is adult data. When everything, this is pupil dilation again, when everything is known, you don't care. You know what there was in this cup. But when there are 2, 3, or 4 objects, there is the normal pupil dilation. However, when you go beyond subitizing, pupil dilation goes down. Doesn't go up. It doesn't go to baseline, but it goes down, suggesting that there's a shift in meta representation from a representation which is only disjunctive examples of token to a quantified representation. Okay, so basically, these are the kind of things that we are doing. Again, here, sometimes we have success or failure. This is perhaps a partial success. We tried with the infants. This is a work that Irene Canudas is doing now. There is a poster to it. We present many of these situations. And the question here is, can we show that infants have a notion of all versus some? And then at the end, we go into a situation in which these balls, some of them explode, some of them do not explode. Well, for the moment, we do not find a very clear sign that infants have any sign of quantifying with these situations. Okay, what I want to say again to finish this, that I think there are these questions that they're still there, and I think that the really bottom line moral of this kind of seminar is there's been progress in these last 15, 20 years. We know that this question cannot be ignored. We know that we are very far from having satisfactory answers, but we also know now how to go about asking these questions. And this is the great progress to me that the idea of the language of thought has brought to experimental psychology. Thank you.